To be young, black, and gifted. To be young, black, and creative. To be young, to be black, to be creative. To be a woman, to be a man. To be a woman in a man's world. To be a man in a woman's world. To be a creator in a white man's world. What does that mean to you? I say, what does that mean to you? I say, what does that mean to you? Listen, listen, listen. I beg you to listen. I beg you to learn. I beg you to open your mind. I beg you to see, to read, to breathe, to believe, to believe. To believe the stories, to believe our stories, to believe her story, to believe his story, to believe their story. To know our story is to see our story. To know our story is to be our story. To be young, black, and creative. Hey, this is Rana Campbell, your Chief Dream Driver, and welcome to the No Parking Podcast, where through conversations and discussions with creatives like yourself, we'll find interesting approaches to help you take your dreams out of park, put them in drive, and ride towards success. Welcome to episode 192, and as promised in episode 191, we are going to be speaking with our past guest, Beth Diana Smith, a New Jersey-based interior designer. But this time, we're going to be talking about what it means to be a Black creator. So many times as creatives, we have our identity questioned, and there are so many things that we don't get to talk about. And there are so many ways that race plays into who we are, what we do, what we see, how we create. And I was so excited when Beth reached out to me post her episode and told me about an incident that she had. And she suggested that the topic would make for a great episode. And I really agreed with her because I really feel like there's so many times when we're silent. There's so many times that we feel like we can't talk about certain issues, especially when it comes to race, gender, class, whatever it may be, because we don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. And why not, right? I think it's through those uncomfortable conversations that is where we spark dialogue. That's where we spark learning. And I encourage you all to listen to today's episode and reflect on your own experiences about what it means to be a creator of color. And I mean, this is a show about entrepreneurship and putting your dreams into drive. But at the same time, we cannot ignore that there are just everyday things that we have to navigate. I would love for you guys to share this episode. It's a bit of a deviation from our normal episodes. Remember, we are Dreams and Drive across the board on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Post it to your Instagram stories, post it to Twitter, post it to Facebook. Use the hashtag Dreams and Drive when sharing as well. I want to see what you guys think about this episode. Reach out to Beth or me. You can find Beth at Beth Diana Smith on all those platforms. And remember, Dreams and Drive, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So we start out with just a small background on Beth for anyone who did not listen to episode 191. You want to learn about Beth. And then we dive into, when was it that you first noticed you were different? And if you're wondering, that intro was totally a freestyle. I just felt it. And sometimes when you feel things, you should act on it. So for people who haven't tuned in to part one of our interview with Beth, please, Beth, give us a little brief synopsis. Who are you? What's your dream driving journey been looking like to date?
So my name is Beth Diana Smith. I am a New Jersey-based interior designer, used to be a finance and accounting girl. And my dream driving journey is literally being able to bring design to everyone who can love and appreciate that your home should be your oasis.
And where did that love for, design come from?
It was so random. When I got to be closer to 30, I was finally making enough money to really do things in my own home and just kind of going through that process. And I had recently launched a professional organizing business because I've always had OCD. I literally just kind of fell in love with everything, like bringing things together, figuring out the space plan, the colors, the textures. it's almost like it found me versus the other way around.
Well, definitely, guys, you have to go back to the episode before this to get the full story. But today we are going to talk about something I think is dear to both you and my heart, and that is what it means to be Black and in the design industry, Black and being a creative, right? So, Beth, for you, when was the first time, or actually, let's go back a little bit further just to get a little base ground here. Do you remember the first time that you realized color was something other people saw? Or, when did you first, I don't want to say realize you were Black, but realizing being Black made you different?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say, as a kid, even though, I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, which is at the time was so incredibly diverse. I remember being in middle school and I was walking with a group of my friends, guys and girls, and we were crossing the street on Bloomfield Avenue, and I heard someone lock their car door. And one of the guys, made a comment about it. But I think that was probably like one of the first reality checks I had. Wow. I would say like my earliest memory of being like, well, what did you think we were going to do? Like, we're kids, like literally, I think I might've been in like 7th or 8th grade.
But already, do you remember if your group of friends was diverse? Like, was it were you all Black, or were there all different types of children there?
Everyone was Black. There was one person that could have passed for, no, I would say he could have passed for white, but not really. Someone who didn't know him might have likely thought he was Hispanic.
When thinking about my own, like, when did I first realize color? It's this story that, like, sometimes when you think back to childhood, you don't know if you actually remember it or if it's just because you've heard it so many times that it's something that's real. But I remember this. I was actually in pre-K, and I just remember, like, when you're playing with kids, and there was this one girl that, I don't know why I remember her name. Her name was Vanessa, and I remember being, maybe it was like a recess environment, and her telling me, my mom said I can't play with you because you're Black.
Oh my God.
And that was just something as a little kid that really stuck with me, because this was like a Christian school. It was in Nutley, New Jersey. You would think that, in a preschool, kindergarten environment that kids aren't seeing color, but I just remember, like, I don't remember if I cried, or I think I remember telling my mom or something, but it was just that those words, I can't play with you because you're Black. And after that year, my mom put us in public school. So from kindergarten to 6th grade, I was around, in Orange, New Jersey, I was at a predominantly Black, elementary school. So that wasn't something that came up again, but it was just that moment that, wow, it's something people are taught, right? Because there's no way, I feel like it's kids, you don't see color. So if someone that young is saying something like that, you realize that it's really something that's been taught to them.
You literally read my mind. That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, oh, because that's exactly what, she's hearing at home. Because kids don't understand that yet. You don't come out of the womb with hatred or knowing or with preconceived notions based on someone's color. But there could be someone, at home saying Black people this, Jewish people that, Latino people this. You don't know what is being said, but it's so telling that at such an early age that she was being taught hate so early. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine her views right now.
Right? Hopefully they have evolved and she's been able to, I don't know whatever happened to her, but we can only imagine. It's funny because when I went to middle school, for me, that was a point of, I think, difference was really highlighted, because I went from a public school where it was predominantly Black to an all-white private school where I was one of maybe 5 other women of color or people of color in the entire grade. And that was the culture shock of my life, Beth. Like, I think even on my end, because I had never been around that environment, right? And I feel like in those early days, do you know how people start to see you as like the token Black girl? That's where I started to feel that. Like, you know, I had to be the example for what every Black person does. Or, you know, if someone needed an answer, I was the person they went to. And that for me was when that part of the journey started evolving.
I can only imagine. But it also shows the small-mindedness of people. Like, you're expecting one person to represent millions, which is absolutely so ludicrous to think. And I think that also goes back to preconceived notions, because if you expect this one person to be reminiscent of how all Black people are, like, that is so mind-numbingly, hate to be blunt, but it's almost mind-numbingly stupid.
Right.
To think that would be okay or proper. Like, talk about stereotypes.
Right. When did you start seeing color play into the work that you were doing as a creative?
Oh my God. I think I saw it way before I ever became a creative.
Okay.
I would say, you know, when I was in college for my initial degree, I was about 19, maybe 20. And it was for this company in Fairfield, New Jersey. And I was doing accounting work, like, during school. And there was an older Italian gentleman. His name was Joe. I will never forget this. And he was showing me something that he was working on for this organization. And he had like this picture, and more like a poster board. And it showed a carnival. But everyone in the photo, like, no matter what they were doing, was white. And I don't know if I was young or because I grew up in such a township that was so diverse. Like, my first reaction was like confusion. So I very innocently asked, I was like, Joe, where's like the Black people? Like, where are the other races? And he said, they're all in the brothel in the back.
What?
And yes. And I don't think at the time, at the time, like, I didn't even know what brothel was. So I said, what's a brothel? And then he said, a whorehouse. When I tell you, I felt so stunned. He thought it was funny.
And he felt comfortable saying that to you.
He felt comfortable. And mind you, just to add a little bit more context to it, I was literally between 19 and 20. He had to be in his 60s. And I was so stunned because up to this point, I think I had been there for maybe, let's say, like a year. So I knew pretty much everyone that worked there. There was only about 40 people in this office. And I can't believe that this guy who I said hello to every morning and always came off so nice to me would say something like that. And I'm talking about, this was like 99, 2000. Like, this was almost half my life ago. And I will never forget that moment.
How did it make you feel?
Oh, angry. I think at the first, it's like you go through that series of emotions. First, I was stunned. Then, like, when he ran, I saw he was making it a joke. My first instinct was to chase him and hit him.
And God forbid you did, right?
God forbid, yeah. And I think about that now, and I think at the time, it's not like those were conversations I had with my parents, right? So I didn't really know how to react. Like, so how I would have reacted now versus then is wavelengths different. But at the time, it really just sat with me, and I just could not believe that someone said that.
You know, it's interesting. You know, you're Caribbean. My parents are Caribbean. And I feel like my parents growing up, they were aware of race, but they always tried to make it seem like you're here to do a job. You're here to do this. Don't let what people say about you bother you, right? Because for them, I think the way race was constructed, maybe like for my parents in Jamaica, was a little bit different than how it played out here. So their early formative years were different. So there were some things that they just couldn't relate to. But the thing that really strikes out to me is like when I first started seeing me being Black as a creator and all that stuff was actually in my full-time job when I'm somebody who, like, you know, I like to wear different hairstyles. I like to dress how I like to dress, right? So I used to wear wigs a lot at my full-time job. Not because I didn't like my hair or anything, just because I liked the ability to express myself. And the CEO of the company, you know when you first tell someone it's a wig and they're like, oh my gosh, right? But then every time I'd have a new hairstyle, she'd make it her point to then say, is this a wig? Is this your hair? Right? And it became like, hey, I taught you, I educated you that it was, but you don't have to keep asking me about it, right? And I think for me, it's like the way I express myself, the clothes I wore, maybe even my hairstyle, that's where I started to see that others were perceiving it through the lens of me being Black. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, that makes 1,000% sense. It's almost like, oh, you know, Black girls wear hair weaves. Black girls have tattoos. Oh, Black girls are less educated. It's almost like even with you explaining something, oh, it's just a wig. Like not knowing why you chose to wear a wig. For her, it probably fulfilled some sort of stereotypes. Every time she saw you, she's just like, oh, is that what this is? Or it could just be curiosity. You know, because she's not used to it and not realizing that she was so ridiculously inappropriate.
Yeah, not realizing that after the 5th time of you seeing me have a new hairstyle, you don't have to keep saying, like, because it becomes embarrassing and then you start to feel, I know they say shame is constructed, but you do start to feel embarrassed, right? Or you do start to wonder if everyone's just looking at you, wondering, hey, is she wearing some kind of mop on her head or something? So for me, that's where I really, I just dreaded coming into the office sometimes when I had a new hairstyle because I knew that I had to answer all these questions or that I would get so many questions. And I wonder, when Susie down the road dyes her hair blonde, you're not saying anything to her, right? So why do I get this kind of chastisement? So, in the design industry, though, I think I really want to get into what it means working day to day, and really feeling what it means to be Black, being a Black woman as a creative entrepreneur. Can you tell me about a time that it became very apparent to you in your work, your entrepreneurial endeavors, that you were being judged by the color of your skin?
Oh, man. So I would say that the story that kind of sticks out the most is when I was filming this HGTV pilot called Restoring Glory. And it was a mixed bag. So I was partnered with a Black contractor who I kind of pulled in. So the production company had originally reached out to me. They had interest in my work. But if you're familiar with the HGTV formula, it's always 2 people, right? Like Chip and Joe. They like partnerships. So they were asking, well, HGTV is working on diversity. Do you know a Black contractor? At the time, I knew one, right? So I said, yeah, I know someone. Let me see if he's interested. It was someone who I'd recently worked with, recently met, had only worked with this person on one job. But again, he was literally the only Black contractor that I knew that was licensed and in my area. So, this person comes in, but now I'm getting to meet kind of I realized, oh, he's a family-owned business. Great. It's him, his dad, and his brother, and they had a receptionist who was white. It wasn't, I don't really care what color you are. So we started going through this process, and I realized our morals and values did not line up. That's one, right?
With the contractor or HGTV?
With the contractor. Okay. So let me add this disclaimer as well. I have no idea if HGTV was ever aware of what was going on behind the scenes. Okay. Now, because you don't work directly with HGTV, you work directly with, for this particular show, and I believe, which is kind of the norm with HGTV, you'd work directly with the production company, and the production company is who deals directly with HGTV. So even with the executive that we were dealing with for this show, I had only met her one time, and that was for the first day of filming, and then I never saw her, again. But when I say our morals and values didn't line up, because for me, I'm like, well, there's there's no black people in HGTV. Let's be, at that time, like, let's be real. So it was important that was like, it's important that we represent our best work and our best selves, because representation matters, which I hope is something that we all know. But that was something I realized that they clearly did not care about. The second part is that the white receptionist, once we started filming, every time actually I take that back, even before filming, when we were doing the first walkthrough of this property and she was there, she gave me such attitude. And, you know, even when I said hi to her, it almost like broke her to speak. And I thought it was so strange. I'm like, this probably maybe the first or second time we've ever met. I know I haven't done anything to you. I didn't pay it any attention because I kind of follow the train of thought that whatever you got going on with you doesn't have anything to do with me, unless I know I've done something to you. It was very apparent to the executive producer. So a couple of days later, he called me and he asked, was there an issue? And I said, well, not to my knowledge. However, I did notice the same thing. To make a long story short, what I realized was that her attitude had nothing to do with me. I wish you could see me doing my air quotes. She was being protective of them. And I asked, protective how? Because now it's your family-owned business, right? The three contractors plus you, and then there's just me representing my company. So we got 4-1. So what are you protecting them from? She's like, oh, I felt like this should have been their show. And I said, if I brought, this particular person into this show, like this is an opportunity that I brought to him. Could you please explain to me why you think the show should be about you? And she couldn't. And I realized that there was all these family dynamics going on that just resulted in so much bad behavior. And I was like, this is an issue for me, because what I don't want to do is not be able to bring my best work and my best self because of whatever dynamics that you have. And I was just really disgusted by the behavior, and when we first met with the client, the contractor, which was mind-boggling to me, wanted to ask me about my fees and how I could cut them. And my first thought was, your ignorance to how design fees are calculated is not my problem. Each designer does things differently. I just felt like it was a lot of attitudes and unprofessionalism. But on the same token, I was like, but these are coming from Black men. So I have these 3 Black men and this white receptionist, and it just became such a weird dynamic. And I said, between her attitude, and I wasn't going to lower myself to that type of behavior because I'm going to be a professional. What I wish I could go back and change is the level of professionalism that I offered, because I realized that don't confuse professionalism with being a doormat. And I was almost at that level in order to rise above it. But you can't rise with everyone because they're just not going to get it.
Wow. So there would seem to be like a lot of dynamics at play, like even being a Black woman, like you being a woman. Would they have done that if you were a man? If it was another Black man, would they have been trying to get you to say those things? There's a lot there, at least from my perspective.
I think if I was a man, that it would have played differently. So, and I'm glad you picked up on that. There were definitely a lot of dynamics. You had the Black woman versus the white woman, and then you had the Black woman versus the 3 Black men. And then, eventually when things got even before we started filming, one of my brothers and my really close friends knew what was going on. And they were literally sending me prayers each morning, like for the days I had to go film, because that's how toxic it was. And my brother has sent me one, and he said, it takes more strength to stay quiet and walk away than let it all loose. Rise above it and you'll be bigger and better. And every morning I would just reread that, like, woosah, don't let other people take your power. And I say that because giving your power away to people they aren't people I care about. You aren't my friends. Like, to me right now, you're still strangers. I'm still getting to know you, but you're showing me who you are. So when HGTV aired the pilot, oh my God, Rana, I must have been praying every day, like, God, thank you for the opportunity that people are going to be able to watch it, but please don't greenlight this show. And they aired the pilot twice. I want to say about 3 to 4 weeks apart. When they aired it the first time, like we knew it was coming. I had a viewing party at my house with with my close friends and like then their friends. And my house was when I say my house was jam packed with people. And we made it fun. Like I did gift bags with like my brand on it. Like I made, I love these things called boozy waffles. And we made it fun. And it was so nice to have all this support because for the most part, only a handful of people knew what was going on the background. But it was like, I don't want this to be greenlit because I didn't want to stay in a bad situation. But I didn't want someone to try to push me out either because there's such a huge difference. You got to stand your ground. Mm-hmm. But I realized like if God's plan is that the show gets greenlit, I can't walk away because it's too big of an opportunity. However, I literally had a sheet prepared of what my demands would be. Like, this is what has to change and this is the behavior that has to change. And the production company, did apologize to me. One apology I thought was very genuine because he didn't know what was going on until I went to him and I was like, here's what happened and here's the times and dates of examples. Because I was someone that was in corporate, like I could keep a spreadsheet going and track some stuff really quickly. And the other person, it was an apology, but I felt like, yeah, you're apologizing, but you are also part of the problem because you enabled their behavior.
First of all, I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of that, Beth. You know how you said, like, your brother sent you that prayer about how it takes more strength to stay calm and rise above it. But is there ever a time where you feel like we as Black women, sometimes we constantly have to be the bigger person? Like, doesn't that ever get overwhelming or how do you feel about that?
You raised such a good point. I'm going to give you a really good example. And this was this was like last week. New York City has 2 design buildings, right? So I sat down to have lunch with some of the marketing people at one, and we spent 3 hours. The first couple hours was conversation, getting to know each other. It was a follow-up for this panel I did at my alma mater for the design school I went to. And we ended the last hour and we got heavily into race and why it was important for diversity, especially within our industry. And my personality is very blunt, probably to an extreme sometimes, but always very honest. And we covered everything from colorism, why it was important for them to also not only diversify between men and women on their panels, but also across races. I literally explained like the brown paper bag test, like those types of things. And it was okay, even though this is one Black girl having this conversation with 3 white girls, everyone was open. So there was no uncomfortable conversation. It was like, this is what this is. And this is why this is important. And they were receptive and their mind was blown because they had no idea that certain things were still an issue or had been an issue. And then 3 days later, I'm at the doctor's office. As you know, I'm still trying to recuperate from a neck injury and I'm in the waiting room. And this guy comes in older, I would say in his 60s. And he goes to the front desk. Doctor's offices, waiting rooms are small, almost like the size of someone's bedroom. And he loudly, it was like he was in surround sound, is saying that he hears a follow-up from his hip replacement and how a group of niggers pushed him down the stairs. Because I have limited range of motion with my neck, when I turn, I have to turn my whole body. So I turn and I could see one of the women that worked there, her mouth was on the ground. Everyone in the waiting room, including people that worked there, was white except for me and an older gentleman that was a couple of seats away from me. And everyone is quiet. Maybe because I don't know. Maybe because I was still heavy from, even though having a great conversation on Monday, those types of things. Maybe because I was in pain. I didn't feel like being bothered with someone's stupidity or ignorance or racism. And my response was, they probably pushed you down the stairs for using that word. And then the Black gentleman who was a couple seats away from me said, that's exactly what I was thinking. And I was like, it's so funny how people antagonize situations and then sit here and play the victim.
Did he say anything?
He never responded. And I know he heard me because I also now was on surround sound. And I'm so glad you told this story about the girl when you were a kid. I realized later that the woman that I assumed was his wife, because he was so much older, was actually his mother. And I was like, oh, this is why you were probably quiet too, because either you raised the racist or you feel the same way he does. But then it just came full circle. So now an hour and a half later, I'm finally leaving the doctor's office. Lo and behold, I end up back in the waiting room with this guy again as I'm like checking out. And the guy falls. Like, for some reason, he was in a wheelchair. He stood up and then he fell. And by the time I, did a full pivot around to see it was him, I turned back to the woman in front of me, one of the people that worked there. And I was like, that's karma. And she said, what's funny is there's a woman on the other side of you behind you. And she's the one that helped him up. And it was a Black woman. And I was like, well, maybe this is a good example of why God took my neck away for a little bit. Because I would have probably I was like, girl, don't do it. Leave him down there. But it's so funny that it just came full circle. I'm like, he got taught that, but another quote unquote N-word is the one who helped you up.
That is just, It goes to show you how this stuff still exists, right? People are still having these experiences. And it's also like, what do you do in those experiences? Because a lot of us don't know what we do or don't know what to do.
Yeah. It becomes, I feel like you see so many things happen because you always see like these viral videos, right? Things could easily be recorded. And I feel like one of the things I know I wanted to make sure we covered, like, how do you keep your dreams and drive when other people are trying to put the brakes based on their ego, their hate, or their race? And I feel like that is all things that you have to practice, is all things that you have to be aware about. And it's also always being calm enough to think before you act. Because, and I say that because even at the doctor's office, it took me time to see who said it. I had time to see the woman's face, to see like her mouth on the ground. But why didn't one of them say something? Like, he was talking to your staff. You could have said,
that's what I was thinking.
Yes, he could have said that. One of them could have said, out of the three of them, so you can't use that kind of language in here. That's not okay. But instead, your silence told him that it was okay. So here go me with no neck, responding back in surround sound, because I don't want him to think that you can use that kind of language in front of someone that you would be ignorant enough to think that that type of wording would be appropriate.
Afterwards, though, when you went home, I know, because you even called me up and you told me about this incident you had. Like, what did, and I keep asking about how it made you feel, but like, what did this motivate you to do, or what did this inspire within how you approach things or your own work moving forward?
Oh my God, it was a range of emotions. So as soon as it happened, I did what most of us do. I sent it to my girls in the group chat, right? Mm-hmm. But when I came home and had like the opportunity to actually tell the story, even when, I called you up, that day I was so heavy. Like, I felt so angry all day. And I thought about, is there something I could have done differently? Is there something I should have said differently? But I realized, like, one thing that who's really kind of been my mantra, throughout, starting kind of like the beginning of 2018, is I'm not going to waste my time or energy on the people, places, and things that don't matter. So I don't have to educate every ignorant person about race. And I'm hoping that I always feel this way, because it is exhausting. I felt so exhausted that day. And I was up about it all night because I could not get out of my anger about that situation, for this man to really think that it was okay. Like, you were in a public setting. You had to walk past me and another Black person to get into this doctor's office. So you knew we were there. You just didn't care. So you're doing it in public. You're doing it in front of mixed races. This just shows me that you do this comfortably and regularly enough to think that your behavior is no big deal. And then you have other people who are willing to be silent. So it just made me feel so heavy. And then I really had to think about it on a couple of days. I was like, I'm not okay with this. I feel like I wanted to create the conversation. So I was like, this is outside of interior design. Like, every Black creative, every Black professional, I'm sure, goes through similar things. Even when I was in corporate, I saw, like, I am vertically challenged, right? I am 4'11". And people always shocked when they see me in real life, like, oh my God, girl, I thought you'd be taller. me too. But even in my corporate life, people be very surprised by my color because of my name or my height, and think that I was somehow timid, and I'm the exact opposite. And I would have to prove to people a lot that, no, I actually know what I'm doing and I'm actually intelligent, but I'm going to show you better than I can tell you, because I'm not wasting my time explaining to you what my degrees are, what I have done, and what I continue to do, but I can definitely show you better than I can tell you.
You know what that makes me think of? So my best friend and I, last night, we were actually talking about this. So she's currently on the job hunt. She had a baby. So she was, took like a year off to kind of just be with her son for a year. And so she's now back into the job hunting world. And she's like, I have a degree. I went to a really good school, but I still feel like I have to work so much harder to prove myself, right? She said she went on an interview, and it was just like she had to keep reiterating all the stuff in her resume, but she felt as if she were a white man, or if she was even a man, or in general, maybe even a white woman, she wouldn't have to constantly feel like she has to do the most in order to be seen. And that's something that I was thinking about. I think I said to her, I'm like, girl, we've been doing that since slavery, right? They don't want us, they only want us for what we're best at, right? Breeding and cooking. In the sense of, back in the day in slavery times, Black women were seen to be animals, right? We were, and it's just like, it's 2019, and we're still fighting that fight. It has evolved in different ways. And I can only speak to being a Black woman because that's all I've ever been. I've never been anything else. I know there are other experiences, other races, other genders as well. But there's just this constant fight. And I think these conversations matter, because we feel like we got to keep it in all the time. And that's where there's so much poison. And I think I know there's this whole like women's empowerment movement, Black women empowerment, but I think we still internally suffer from this idea of, are we good enough?
You made so many great points just now. And I feel like this is something we read about all the time. I think it was mid 2018, and there was a story. I think this was down in maybe Florida, and it talked about the two women who put in for a job, and their response was that they weren't interested because their names were too Black. And I feel like you see these things all the time, where either it's how you look. Oh my God, prime example is I think she's like a newscaster, a news reporter last week, and she was fired because they didn't like her natural hair.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's like, no matter what you do, people are going to find a way to attack you. And sometimes they're literally going to attack you because of the features. It could be your hair. It could be how brown your eyes are. It could be your height. It could literally boil down to colorism. Oh, you too dark, you too light. Like, why are you so concerned about what I look like? And to your point, it is toxic, because as a Black woman, we're told to always be strong. You're told to, power through, but you can't power through and let everything sit inside all the time, because it's almost like you're eating the toxicity, and it's exhausting.
And I think as a creator, as a creative, it becomes ever more important that we don't allow others to dim our light, or to dim our pens, to dim our interior designing capabilities. You know what I mean? Because I feel like there's so much power in when you do create, despite of because that's where you start to see change. But if we're constantly feeling dimmed, then imagine what we're not creating that could really impact the world.
Oh, that is so, so true. I know when I am stressed or something's bothering me, it impacts my creativity so much. It impacts my normal thinking patterns, how I would normally strategize by something, the ideas that would normally easily come to me, I notice that I will struggle with. So that type of stress, just in general, is just not good for your mental health. And you need that. For a creative, I think it's all about like mind, body, and spirit. And that's literally what goes into your work. So when I feel like when one of those are altered, I'm not operating at my best. Like I'm always, I have to literally force myself to second guess things because I know I'm not operating the way that I normally would.
Mm-hmm. In the design industry though, like what do you think that Black creators, Black designers, like how can we make sure that we're being represented? How can we make sure that we're not allowing these systems that want to oppress us to have the upper hand?
Don't be silent. Reach out to people. After the NYCID panel, NYCID being the New York School of Interior Design, and this was a panel that was done in conjunction with the Black Interior Designers Network. I followed up with, the people that I met, people from the design buildings, people from the school, some other contacts, just to say, normal networking behavior. It was so great to meet you. Thank you. Blah, 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 blah. And answering in like, my own personal anecdote based on whatever our communication was, at or after the event. And what I realized in just that hand started to build some relationships. So that's what led to that marketing, that lunch with that marketing team to talk about what I believed would be good ways to incorporate design and diversity in design, specifically at their location. And I did the same thing with my alma mater. But what I knew is that I had pissed someone off because during the panel, I was, as always, honest and blunt. And I said, I had an amazing experience at NYCID. I met great people. For the most part, I loved my professors. I learned a lot. But during my entire time there, I only had one Black professor out of all my classes. And I said, for me, that was an issue. It is not because Black people go somewhere and they're like, well, let me count all the other Black people. That's not how it works. But because I'm not colorblind and I can see things, it was hard to notice that out of all these classes that I had, there was only one Black professor. And that pissed someone off. And their reasoning was because, that person has, a lot of degrees and you need this, this, and this. And I'm thinking, do you really think that he's the only Black person that has the credentials to be a professor? But for me, that's common sense. But that brings me back to another point. And that is, if everybody in the room looks like you, then you need a new room.
Yeah. Because
you don't see anything wrong with your statement. But it wasn't something that this person has said directly to me. It was said to other designers. So I knew when I reached out to like follow up saying, hey, great to meet you. I knew why this person didn't respond. But it's not my job to educate you. And I'm not chasing anybody because that's not even in my personality type. And that's something, if I do it, I'm always going to regret it. But that should have been a learning moment for this person, and it wasn't. Instead, they decided to make the excuse for it because I get it. It probably made you look bad. But this is why it made you look bad. Because your reason is because, it takes a lot of degrees. Yeah, girl, because Black people don't have educations. Like, in the simplest terms.
You know what that reminds me of is the power of advocates within our community, right? So I'll give you an example. So I recently, for an XO Nicole story, episode 144 of the podcast, I interviewed Dr. Joy of Therapy for Black Girls. And she recently I think in December, she was a co-host alongside Angela Simmons on Teen Mom, Young and Pregnant, the reunion special. And normally those Teen Mom reunion specials are normally hosted by Dr. Drew, the very well-known white psychiatrist male. And so in interviewing her for X on Nicole, we were talking about how this came to be, and a few things came to the front in our conversation, which was, number one, there was an advocate behind the scenes. So she said that I think the manager of talent was a Black woman, and it was her role to make sure that there were diverse talent being brought in for these new opportunities at MTV. So having that advocate really helped her on the inside, right? And making sure there was someone there who was checking the systems already in place was very important. But what she told me that I really thought was interesting was the comments that she got from her listeners after the show. And she said in one of her comments on Instagram, a listener said that seeing Dr. Joy, a therapist, a Black therapist, hosting Teen Mom, opened up her eyes that she could do it too. Because she was so used to seeing a white man hosting these conversations, when it's funny because a lot of not all of the people on the show are white. They're a diverse cast, but it was always, the conversations were always being led by these white males, right? Mm-hmm. So she said, seeing you, Dr. Joy, you just taking that opportunity show me that there are possibilities. And I think that's a reminder to us as creatives, like, no matter what your niche is, even if you feel like there aren't a lot of other people who look like you doing it, still do it anyway, because what you're doing is opening the door for somebody else, or just putting on glasses for somebody else who might not even see that they could be doing it too.
Exactly. This goes back to representation. Representation matters so greatly. When I was having this meeting last week with that marketing team, I was trying to get them to understand why it was important, right? And my simplest example was, think how excited you get when you see a woman doing something powerful or doing something that you want to do. So for them, it was like, oh yeah, you get so excited. I'm like, well, how do you think that Black people feel when we see someone that actually looks like us, regardless of being a woman or a man, just someone whose color is reflective of ours is doing something amazing. I remember when Obama was running for president, I might have ran out and bought every Obama shirt ever created because I was excited to see someone with brown skin doing something that had never been done before, actually, becoming the president of the United States. And that's important. Representation does matter. Even if it's something as simple like, why don't we have more Black dolls? Like, just the simple things become so important because you're opening someone's eyes to something that they have never seen. And it's so sad that with something so simple as a TV show that she was just like, oh, you know what? I've never seen that before. But really, it's to a point you made earlier, it's 2019. Why haven't we seen it before?
One of the things that this reminds me of is how when two different worlds intersect, there's always a moment of learning that's possible. So this past weekend, I saw the movie Green Book. Have you heard of it? It's with Mahershala Ali, and he's playing this, I think it's like in the 60s. He's this musician, and he's taking this road trip to the Deep South, and he hires this white bodyguard. And
I have seen the previews for it. Absolutely.
It's really good. I definitely recommend it. But what really, without giving anything away, what really I took away from it was there was this clashing of two worlds, right? Here you have this white Italian guy who before was very racist, but took the job because he needed the money, right? The common theme was his family. He was going to do what he had to do for his family. Then you have this Black musician who, was really, really, I would want to say not elitist, but he felt he kind of felt like he didn't belong in the Black community because he was this classically trained pianist, and he didn't even know who Little Richie was. It was really funny in the movie how they brought that out. So you have these two worlds, right, where they have these preconceived notions of each other, And when they had to spend 2 months together traveling the Deep South and battling all that they had to battle together, they started to learn from each of their worlds, right? And I feel like if we start to have more conversations, there is so much educating that can go on both sides. Because I'm not going to sit here and say that, just because Black people have experienced racism, that they might not be racist or carry discriminatory thinking towards other people too, right? There's all things that we all can learn from other people. So I feel like when you experience situations, as you were saying, Beth, don't be afraid to stand up. Don't be afraid to ask questions, because sometimes asking somebody a question will really make them think about why they're doing what they're doing.
Absolutely. That's an amazing point.
It's like, imagine if you had the time or if you had the ability to go to that man in the doctor's office, right? And just say, did you ever think about how that makes a person feel? What if you had a daughter who was half, I don't even know, maybe he wouldn't care. But sometimes just asking the question creates something in their mind, even if they never expressed it out to you.
That's interesting. I would definitely have to ponder on that. I definitely agree that I think in the right setting, and the person is open to it, you should definitely ask those types of questions. I remember a few years ago, there was a woman who I never met, but I kind of met her through business. So we were like Facebook friends. We had never met in real life. And she made a post about All Lives Matter. And I personally take issue with that statement, because no one's saying that not everybody's lives matter. The purpose of Black Lives Matter is because historically it's been shown that our lives are not treated the same. Mm-hmm. And I scanned the comments, and there were a lot of people who felt the same way I did. And I don't remember exactly what I wrote anymore, but I said, this is kind of disappointing. And I pretty much reiterated the same thing I just stated. And someone made a comment, I guess one of her friends, like, well, you don't know her. Her son probably feels differently. And then I realized, she has a Black son. And she sent me a DM, and she was explaining it, how she knows how her son feels, blah, 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 blah. And I had nicely explained to her. And I said, I appreciate that you have a Black child. But as a Black woman who grew up in a house with her Black father and her Black brothers for most of her life, I don't even know how they feel. I can't walk in their shoes as a Black man the same way they can't walk in my shoes as a Black woman. So I feel relatively confident to saying that as a white woman, that you cannot somehow transcend into your son's shoes. So for me, her reasoning was so small-minded in its response. So sometimes I'm like, I feel like I have to be mentally prepared if I'm going to jump down that rabbit hole with certain people. 9 times out of 10, I see something on Facebook and I want to comment, and I don't, because I know my personality. Once you get me started, it's going to take hell and high water to sometimes get me to shut up. And I'm just like, is this really how I want to spend my time?
You know what I'm thinking about, based on that conversation, or what you heard that man say, how he said he got pushed down the stairs by a bunch of N-words, right? Mm-hmm. A bunch of niggas. I'm thinking about these boys, or whoever it was, right? Let's say, I'm making this up. Let's say these were young boys, young Black boys, right? Think about how it then creates a cycle of anger that if that never goes checked, imagine how that perpetuates through those young boys' lives. Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about, like, what happens to them, or how do we then, I guess the bigger question is, what do we do?
What's funny about that, as I continue to wait in the waiting room, and even when one of the woman whose face I saw drop when he made the statement, she called out to me 5-10 minutes later, and she asked me to go into the hallway with her, and she apologized for the man's behavior, right? One of the women that worked there. And she was like, he was in here yesterday. There's something clearly wrong with him, blah, 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 blah. First of all, craziness does not beget racism. Like, that's not how that works, but I digress. And even through kind of listening, during my additional time in the waiting room with him and hear him talking to the woman that I realized was his mother, I wonder, did that group of N-words ever really exist?
Because we're out here doing a lot of dope stuff, right? And
he was like, Ma, do you have any painkillers? No, he didn't say, Ma, I apologize. He said, do you have any painkillers? And she said, oh, whatever his name was, stop it. And then he said, I don't think the doctor's going to give me any. And I was like, I wonder if this guy made up the story to act like he was in more pain than what he was in order to get painkillers. So I was like, did these group, quote unquote, ever really exist in the first place? Because it's not he's not going to be the first, the last, or the millionth person to have lied on a group of Black people. You know what I mean? So I was like, this thing has so many layers to it. And that's why it just left me so unsettled that day and night, because it's like, I'm mad. I'm agitated. I told this idiot that, that's probably why why they pushed him down the stairs, because of that word. And they could have never existed in the first place.
Wow. I'm here thinking about it. Like, right. And he feels like, all right, I'm going to blame it on somebody. Who do I blame it on?
Yep. Exactly. There was, this was a famous story probably like a decade ago. And it was the woman, and this is such a drastic example. It was the woman that killed her kids. And she said it's because she was carjacked by a Black guy. I don't know if you remember this, but her kids were young. And this was literally like a decade or more ago. And I'm like, how many times have you heard this? Oh, a group of Black men did it. And they're invisible because they don't exist. Or there was a white female officer last year who said that she was shot by a Black man. I'm sorry, 2 years ago. And then she shot herself. There was no Black man. So I'm just like, this group was probably invisible. And I really had to check myself, like, Beth, do not spin on this, on a story could completely have been fabricated, and this quote unquote group was just his made up story so he can get something else that he wanted.
I think this just goes to show how we have to continue to advocate for ourselves, and we have to continue to be support to others when they are advocating for themselves, right? It's really easy to just turn your eye when someone brings their story to light, or to say that person's not, not telling the truth. But I think we really need to support our fellow creatives, especially creatives of color, when they're airing out things that have been done to them, and when they're looking to support. Because if we can't support each other, then who's going to support us, right?
Exactly.
Because everyone else is out there supporting, their people, even if it's based on lies. And it's just like, we gotta support ourselves, and we really gotta just advocate and encourage people to share their truths, because I feel like in those moments, that's when we can start to enact and push for change.
Oh, that was perfectly stated. That's exactly what it is.
So thank you, Beth. I feel like it's been over an hour already. I didn't realize that this is just the beginning of the conversations. I feel like there's so many conversations that we dream drivers can have in our own circles, our own group chats. And this is just one part of it, right, Beth?
Yes, absolutely.
One part of it. So I encourage you guys to go back to your own communities, to start having these conversations. It's Black History Month. Learn the history, like whatever your niche is, learn what the experience of what it means to be a person of color in your industry means. I know for podcasting, even within the business sphere, every time I go into iTunes or Apple Podcasts and I look at the top 10 podcasts in business, you know what I see? A bunch of white men, a bunch of white women. Not saying that those podcasts are not good, but it just goes to show that there's still room for more representation, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, how do you get there? That's the thing.
It also makes you pose the question, like when people are recommending podcasts and people are scanning, you always look at that image. Will you scroll past because that image is of a Black person? And are you taking the image of a white person a little bit more seriously? Like there's all those undermining factors.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
That's what I love about this podcast. I interview all types of people on the show, but I especially love when I interview people of color who are doing amazing things, especially in industries that are not represented well when it comes to us. So thank you once again, Beth, for sharing your story. And if you haven't listened yet to Beth's first part 1 of this to hear her full story, make sure you go back to the previous episode and listen to it in its entirety.
Thank you so much for having me, Rana.
All right, so that's a wrap for episode 192. I hope you enjoyed hearing Beth and I talk about what it means to be Black, what it means to be a creative, what it means to be young, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be putting our dreams in drive when others are trying to put the brakes on it based on their own ego, based on hate, based on race. Who knows? There's so many obstacles that we face along this journey, but knowing that we're all facing something can be encouraging and inspiring and motivating. And also knowing that you don't have to be silent about whatever it is that you're facing. I think we are scared to have conversations that might make people feel uncomfortable, but I encourage you all. I encourage you all to stand up for yourselves. I encourage you all to ask the questions, to spark the dialogue, because it's 2019 and we've been through so much. We owe it to ourselves to talk about these things, make aware of certain situations that you just feel like and aren't right. There's so many things I know a lot of people in my peer group go through on the daily. I know that there's so many things that we sometimes feel like we don't have access to, that we can't talk about, but I just encourage you guys to find ways that you can, because it can be frustrating and it can be very insular experiencing a lot of the things that we experience. As always, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please, please, please share on social. I love it when you guys are tagging us, posting on Instagram stories, Twitter, Facebook. We are Dreams and Drive across the board, and you can use the hashtag Dreams and Drive as well. Subscribe. Make sure that you also are on our Dreams and Drive newsletter. Once a week, you will get our weekly newsletter, The Keys. You can join by going to dreamsanddrive.com/join. That's dreamsanddrive.com/join. And if you haven't entered our giveaway of the week, remember we are giving away 1 copy of the autobiography of Gucci Mane. I thought it was an interesting read, and I want to give it to one of you all to see what you all think about it. Just go to dreamsanddrive.com/win, dreamsanddrive.com/win. Last thing, thank you to everybody who's been leaving reviews on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. I truly, truly, truly do appreciate it. It's my goal to get to 1,000 reviews by the end of the year. We're at 227 right now. So please, please, please log on to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, click on ratings and review, and click on write a review and let us know what you think about it, or just leave us a rating. Be honest. I'm not asking you guys to give 5 stars if you don't think the show is worth 5 stars. Just be honest about your experience, because it's definitely going to help somebody else who is looking for this type of content. As always, keep dreaming, keep driving, and special thanks to everyone who has been reaching out to learn more about our small business sponsor package. So if you are a small business and want to learn how you can advertise on the Dreams and Drive podcast, simply send me an email, Rana, RANA, at dreamsanddrive.com to learn more. I appreciate you all. I'm wishing you guys have a great week. Let me know if you love this bonus episode of sorts. I want to do more of these. All right. Bye, guys.